Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith. This is day 31. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 59 and 60, the prima pars, which is the will of the angels and the love of the angels. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the Second Revised Edition, translated by the fathers of the English Dominican province. And so here we go. Article 1, whether there is will in the angels. But what is will? As was said in a previous episode, everything existing tends towards its own perfection. Some things do this without knowledge, like the inanimate, which tends toward union via gravity and tends toward the most efficient path between those 2 points, what physicists call the principle of least action. Other things do it without knowledge, but through self-movement, like plants, which tend towards the sun or their roots toward water. Others without knowledge, but through sense, like the dog moving towards food once seen or smelled. All of these are inclined towards their own perfection, preservation, propagation, but they do so without knowing that's what they are doing, or knowing these things to which they tend are good for them. They have no concept of good. They merely tend toward these particular goods via their nature, placed in them by an intelligent creator. We, on the other hand, pursue goods, if we are pursuing them voluntarily, because we consider them to be good. We go to the coffee shop and we buy a coffee not because we are compelled by nature, but because we have thought about the coffee, weighed the pros and the cons of buying one, and we have decided it is good for us to go and get one. Our inclination for goods passes through our knowledge of goodness in general and as apprehended in particular things. And this inclination, informed by knowledge, is what we call the will. In Aquinas' words, and in response to this article, angels are inclined towards what is good, not indeed as if it were merely guided by another towards some particular good only, like things devoid of knowledge, nor towards some particular good only, as things which have only sensitive knowledge, but as inclined towards good in general. Such inclination is termed will. Accordingly, since the angels by their intellect know the universal aspect of goodness, it is manifest that there is a will in them. Will is the inclination to goodness as known in the mind. Article 2, whether in the angels the will differs from the intellect. In God, his will, his intellect are identical because he is without composition, perfectly simple, and what he knows and loves is identical to what he is, the divine essence. But in angels and for us, intellect and will must be distinct faculties or distinct powers because their objects are distinct. The intellect knows truth, the will desires goodness. Moreover, what is known is in the knower, but what is loved is in the object of one's love. So, for example, for me to know the tree, its essence must be in me, in the mind, in some way. But when I love the tree, my love is directed out there, to the object itself, loved. So here we have another distinction between the faculties. We could also see in these faculties the distinction in their object among the transcendentals. So being, truth, goodness, which are all identical in existing things, but distinct as related to the mind or the will, as we've said in previous episodes. Being as known is truth. Being as desired is goodness. In Aquinas' words here, leveraging the Gilby translation, he says, the good and the true are interchangeable from the point of view of the reality they are grounded in, and that is why the good is understood by the intellect as true, and the true is desired by the will as good. And again, for more on being, truth, goodness, I would listen to episodes 4 and 9 of this podcast. All this to say, the intellect and will in angels and in us are truly distinct faculties. Article 3, whether there is free will in the angels. What do we mean by free will? We mean an inclination not necessitated by material nature like the stone falling, nor by instinct like the sheep who runs away from the wolf, even if he's never seen a wolf before, but from knowledge within the mind. from deliberation and choice. This is what we mean by a will that is free. As Aquinas writes, only an agent endowed with an intellect can act with a judgment which is free, insofar as it apprehends the common note of goodness from which it can judge this or the other thing to be good. Consequently, wherever there is intellect, there is free will. It is therefore manifest that just as there is intellect, so is there free will in the angels, and in a higher degree of perfection than in man. Article 4, whether there is an irascible and concupiscible appetite in the angels. We're going to see those terms in depth when we treat of man in the prima pars and then the passions specifically in the prima secundae. But for the purpose of this article, within the treatment of angels, let us simply say that these terms are categories within the broader category of what we call passions or emotions. These passions are elicited in us through the sensed apprehension of things. We see the donut and we feel desire. We see the burglar and we feel afraid. In response to this article, it is sufficient to point out that these feelings are housed within the body. They rely upon the body. As Aquinas says much later on, it is essential to the act of the sensitive appetite, the natural change of the organ. For instance, anger is said, and this is just a saying, to be a kindling of the blood about the heart. Hence it is evident that the notion of passion are actions of a corporal or bodily organ. So since angels do not have a body, they do not have passions or emotions, yet they do have intellectual acts that can be likened to emotions such as love or joy. Aquinas describes those, saying, love and joy, insofar as they are passions, are in the concupiscible appetite, but insofar as they express a simple act of the will, they are in the intellective part. In this sense, to love is to will good for someone, and to be glad or joyful is for the will to repose in some good possessed. But none of these things is said of the angels as by way of passions, which is a fitting segue into question 60, the love of the angels. Article 1, whether there is natural love in an angel. If what we mean by love is what Dante meant in writing the Divine Comedy and saying the love that moves the sun and the other stars, in the sense of any natural inclination to a particular good, then love is what moves the stars. Love is the cause of every action, because everything which acts for an end. It acts for a goal towards something it loves, either because of its nature, like the non-rational stone moving towards unity, or via life, like plants towards the sun, or through sense, like the animal towards food, or by intelligence, like the angels, tending towards the good through a knowledge of it. This is a love which springs from their nature, but we can use a more specific definition of love for the angels given by Aquinas when we spoke about God's love. He said, love is the first movement of the will. And since angels have a natural inclination towards their own perfection, like everything else, but an inclination informed by intelligence, what we call the will, then it follows that yes, in angels there is love naturally. Aquinas says, love results from knowledge, for nothing is loved unless it is first known, as Augustine says. But there is natural knowledge in the angels, therefore there is also natural love. Article 2, whether there is love of choice in the angels. The love of choice is defined by St. Thomas as something loved for the sake of the end. There is a key distinction to be made here between what angels love by nature and what they love by choice. We love, along with the angels, as written into our nature, our own perfection, which is the meaning behind the word happiness. And every single decision that you and I or the angels make voluntarily, we will make it for the sake of being happy, like the stone falls downward when I release it from my hand. The stone's goal towards unity, qua mass, or as a thing that consists of mass, we should say, and our goal towards happiness, both of those goals cannot be erased, and it's not something chosen. But we do choose, as rational creatures, where we think that happiness is to be found. And we do choose the means to that end. This is what allows us to fail, to attain our end. Unlike us, the stone not only has its goal written into its nature, but also the path to that goal. It always takes what physicists call the path of least action. It takes the most intelligent, most efficient path towards its goal because it has an intelligent creator behind it. But for us, the choice of the means, the choice regarding the path and the perceived object of happiness, God has left to us to decide, and we do not always choose correctly. In summary, in answer to this article, angels have a love of nature, happiness, their own perfection, and they have a love of choice, the chosen means to that end. Aquinas writes, there exists in angels a natural love and a love of choice. Their natural love is the principle of their love of choice. Article 3, whether the angel loves himself with both natural love and love of choice. St. Thomas Aquinas says, both angels and men naturally seek their own good and perfection. This is to love self. Hence, angel and man naturally love self, insofar as by natural love each desires what is good for self. On the other hand, each loves self with the love of choice, insofar as from choice he wishes for something which will benefit him. As we have mentioned, our nature is inclined to our own perfection. That means we naturally love ourselves, meaning we seek our own good, and we seek those goods which we think will bring us happiness. And this is something we cannot escape because it is written into our being, which Blaise Pascal describes so profoundly in his work titled The Pensées, or Thoughts. And this is thought number 425, which is worth quoting at length. He wrote, all men seek happiness. There are no exceptions. However different the means they may employ, they all strive towards this goal. The reason why some go to war and some do not is the same desire in both, but interpreted in two different ways. The will never takes the least step except to that end. This is the motive of every action of every man, including those who take their own lives. Yet for very many years, no one without faith has ever reached the goal at which everyone is continuously aiming at. All men complain. Princes, subjects, nobles, commoners, old, young, strong, weak, learned, ignorant, healthy, sick, in every country, at every time, in all ages, and all conditions, a test which has gone on for so very long, without pause or change, really ought to convince us that we are incapable of obtaining this good by our own efforts. But example teaches us very little. So while the present never satisfies, experience deceives us and leads us on from one misfortune to another until death comes as the ultimate and eternal climax. What else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those things that are, though none can help, since this infinite abyss can only be filled with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. Article 4, whether an angel loves another with natural love as he loves himself. Both this article, the one after it and the one before it, give us much to pray and to think about. In this article we ask, is it by natural love with which we love ourselves that we also love others? And the answer is yes, if we see the other as a part of ourselves or an extension of us or somehow included in us, with us. A father loves his son with the same love with which he loves himself when he sees his son as a part of him, when he sees his son as his very own offspring or creation. We love things with a natural love that are one with us. Aquinas says, every creature loves its like, as it is said in Sirach chapter 13, verse 19. Therefore an angel naturally loves another as he loves himself. Both angels and men naturally love self. Now what is one with a thing is that thing itself. Consequently, everything loves what is one with himself. Thus a man loves his fellow townsman with a social love, while he loves a blood relation with natural love, insofar as he is one with him in the principle of natural generation. Unity is the cause of love. It may remind us of the words of Christ, John 17. He said, I do not pray for these only, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. Now on to our last article, Article 5, whether an angel by natural love loves God more than he loves himself. Now one might suspect from the articles preceding this one on how angels naturally love themselves, seek their own happiness, love all else as a means to that end, that this answer is going to come back in the negative. But St. Thomas writes, we observe that the part naturally exposes itself in order to safeguard the whole. As, for instance, the hand, without deliberation, exposes itself to the blow for the whole body's safety. And since reason imitates nature, we find the same inclination among the social virtues, for it behooves the virtuous citizen to expose himself to the danger of death for the public good of the state. And since man is a natural part of the city, then such inclination would be natural to him. Consequently, since God is the universal good, and under this good both man and angel and all creatures are comprised, because every creature in regard to its entire being naturally belongs to God, it follows that from natural love angel and man alike love God before themselves and with a greater love. Otherwise, if either of them loved self more than God, it would follow that natural love would be perverse, and that it would not be perfected, but destroyed by charity. To put that in different words, the man who dies for the salvation of his nation has always been a hero. A surgeon will amputate the limb without hesitation if it's necessary to save the body. We, as particular beings, bear the mark. We carry the flag for being itself, which is God. Existence itself. All existing things are on that team, whether they like it or not. And so our nature, which is from God and ordered to God, when ordered correctly, loves his good, his glory, his will above our own. And it is our task as broken, fallen, sinful creatures to recover that due order, which is the work of grace. But this natural tendency, even in our current state, has not been effaced, just confused. As Lagrange writes, how does man naturally love God more than himself? Man loves God under the aspect of happiness in general. So when looking for happiness, we are looking for God who alone can satisfy us. So let us pray that those who seek find, and that those who have found may one day see him face to face. Lastly, how could the angels and first men and women have fallen if by nature they loved God more than themselves? Lagrange explains, a demon is turned away from God as the author of grace, from God as the author of the law of nature, freely and morally. Nevertheless, the demon at the same time remains necessarily and physically turned to God, the author of his nature, in its physical aspect. This lamentable opposition in the demon pertains to his damnation. And that's it for questions 59 and 60 of the Prima Pars, which is the will of the angels and the love of the angels. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.